first, manufacturing has a bad image. Like when you tell your kids, you tell them, you better be good at school, otherwise you end up working at the factory. That's things that are being said right now. So when you have that mental image, you think, okay, I'm not going to work for those people.
The Industrial Sage Executive Series, sharing the stories behind game-changing executives, their organizations, and insights into today's industry challenges.
Well, hello and welcome to today's Industrial Sage Executive Series interview. I am joined all the way from France. I have the CEO of OSS Ventures, Renaud Devier. Did I get that right, Renaud?
Excellent.
We practiced that many times. Sorry, my French is not that great. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Executive Series.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited about it. So again, I hope I didn't, butcher things too badly. But hey, before we get into the episode, want to know a little bit about OSS Ventures. Like what do you guys do?
Sure. So we are a venture builder. And so a venture builder is a special kind of investment fund. Instead of investing funds in companies, startups, technological startups that already exist, we invest a meaningful amount of money, time, and resource in companies that do not exist yet. We provide with the ideas, we provide with the partners, and we create companies out of nothing. And we are specialized in manufacturing.
Interesting. That sounds really interesting. And we're going to get more into that here in a little bit about specifically, some of the challenges that you're solving and maybe how you're doing this, because it sounds very intriguing, like a sort of a different business model. But before we get into that, I want to kind of learn a little bit about Renaud. So tell me, how did you kind of get into this? How'd you get into the manufacturing space? How'd your career start?
Yeah, well, at the start of my career, I was a nerd, so I was good at math, and I did a school in France where they pay for your studies, which is really good, but then you have to give back up to 2 years in public service. And so I was an economist at the OECD, and I was like studying industry at like 20-year time frame, the whole world. And after 2 years doing that, I told myself, I cannot go on not dealing with reality anymore, because it was all so virtual and so long time frames. And so I told myself, I like the subject, I like the topic of industry. I'll try to go work in a factory. And so they got a very young guy with like a mathematics degree, like a theoretical mathematics degree, trying to go work in a factory. And I think I sent something like 50 letters, got 50 no's from factories, but I got 1 yes from the McKinsey & Company consulting arm specialized in factories. And they were saying that I was good enough to like give some advice to factories. So I did just that. And that is how I started my career in manufacturing. After 4 or 5 years working for McKinsey & Company, I went on to lead planning and then quality and then be a site director. And so the 8 first years of my career, I was deep down in manufacturing and I loved it.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. That's pretty cool. It's a great story, where sometimes you hear people that come in and they didn't start from day one. But what's kind of interesting, it sounds like that you kind of jumped into it and you found a love for it. I mean, is that? I think what's interesting is and I kind of share that a little bit maybe with you in a different light, that I never thought that we would be sort of working in this space. This was several years ago, right? And having come into it, it's awesome. Like it's pretty amazing. But what I think is interesting in your story, you said 50 letters.
Yep.
And you got the one response.
Yeah.
And then
because basically factories were seeing a youngster with a theoretical mathematics degree, like a coder. I was a coder at the time, and just saying basically, hey, got any room? And that's not the way to get hired by a factory.
No, that's awesome. That's fantastic. So, what were, what were some of those, some particular challenges that you had to face sort of coming in that way? Obviously, a big challenge of getting in, right out the gate was getting your foot in the door. As you progressed in your career, what did some of those other challenges look like?
One of the things that I think a lot of people who are not like dealing with manufacturing world do not realize is that a factory or a supply chain is one of the most complex objects in the world. Mm-hmm. Like in a factory, you have 100 people, 200 different types of machines, tens of thousands of different products that you can make, and you need to organize all of that, all those physical flows, all those quality criteria, all that organization. And so a factory or a supply chain is fundamentally one of the most complex objects and organization we ever created as humans. And so as all complex objects, there are a lot of rules, a lot of things to understand, a lot of things to organize. And I think getting to understand that like as a big picture and then getting to try to innovate in that space is mighty hard because the cost of complexity to enter the subject is so high.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super complex. I know that there is a stat that comes out that's saying that, the manufacturing space, supply chain is one of the most data prolific industries out there because of the complex, processes and how layered it is. It's pretty crazy. So I totally understand kind of coming in and having to really just learn all of that. It's a big challenge. Let's talk about influencers in your career. Who's somebody that kind of stands out that has had a major impact in your career, your life? It could be your personal life that has an impact on your career.
Obviously, there are too many to mention, but if I had to pick one, it would be after manufacturing, I created a tech company and I got lucky enough to get invested by a San Francisco-based fund linked to Google. And so the guy who taught me product management was a guy who worked extensively on Gmail. And so he showed to me the way that you think of a product that is immensely complex, that has chaos as inputs and constraints and parameters, and you try to go from chaos to something beautifully simple that does the job. And what I fundamentally that's rewired my mind from complexity has to be dealt with by complexity to complexity can be dealt with simplicity. And he showed me that like naturally and over and over and over again. And in the tech company that I started, the end product after 1 year was 50% smaller than the first product that I shipped.
Wow.
And it was way better, like way better. And so he showed me that and that again. And when I first showed my product to him, I wanted to show everything. And I said, hey, you can do this also and this and that, because, there's that edge case. And he looked at me and he said, this is way too complex for a very simple thing. And that was, okay, right. Yes. That was those kind of moments.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, and that's something that we hear about a lot, and still a lot of companies still struggle with. It's just when it comes to product development and design, a big challenge is developing something that there's not necessarily an addressable market for, because we think this is really cool and we can design it, and so that's one thing. But the other, I love that from the design element piece is that it's exciting and we can get into the weeds about we can do it this way. You do all these different things. But the reality of it is simplicity is the big piece, and then selling that, it's like understanding your audience and your markets. Like it really at the end of the day, this may sound really bad, but most don't care how it happens or what's the inner workings, right? It's just let's look at the result. Let's okay, that it does that. Cool. I'm good with that. Now, obviously, some people you're going to be selling more to engineers, or whatever. They're going to want to get into the weeds and look at that, right? But I think that's really interesting. It's really the simplicity of design, and what What a great story. Super great lesson. What were you, what products were you making?
So I was in the luxury industry in the first part of my career, worked on complex watchmaking. So among the things, the most complicated you can do with like engineers everywhere, complexity being valued over everything else. That was my first part of my career. And at some point, I went out of manufacturing and I created a tech company that I ended up selling. And what really strikes me in those two worlds, there are so many similarities between the tech world and the manufacturing world, because when you look at any application at scale, it's a very complex web of constraints and what it needs to be done, blah, 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 blah. It's a very complex web of engineers to be organized and to be, and so it's basically the same thing. And a lot of methodology, product development methodology, lean method are the same in the two worlds, but they don't mix. And so that's why also we created OSS Ventures.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. No, that's great. I can only imagine. You said just the complexity, and you said you were making initially watches. Is that did I get that right? Yeah. That's pretty cool. Very cool, actually. So let's kind of pivot now to today, like what you're doing. So you mentioned earlier on sort of like the value prop of what you're doing at OSS Ventures, and that you're basically creating companies out of nothing. Explain that to me.
Yeah, sure. So in the grand scheme of things, we think, and we are not the only ones, like a lot of the industry thinks that the era where basically digital and IT in manufacturing was just ERP and SAP. This era is gone. And so what we think is that in 5 to 10 years, any factory will have between 50 and 100 dedicated vertical software that deal with one thing. For example, let's take a very simple example, stock management. So stock management at scale is you have tens of thousands of products. What is the right level of stock? Well, today, people are trying to do some things. We think there will be a software that deals with this subject that will not be in ERP. And so our software will deal with that with artificial intelligence and blah, 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 blah. We think that in any given factory, there will be those softwares. And so we create those softwares. That's our job. We create companies out of nothing. And so we have a very unique methodology, which is we have a web, like a network of what we call preferred partners. Preferred partners are industrial companies, and they share a pain point. So they say, for example, I want to manage my stock, but it's a mess. And so we find 3, 4, 5 companies with the same pain point, and we say to them, look, we are going to build the thing with you and solve the issue, and it's going to cost you zero because OSS takes the risks. But when it works, you are going to say to all your friends in all the factories of the world that it works like a charm. And so we are going to sell as a software as a service what we created with you. We are going to sell it to the other 55,000 factories in the United States or Europe. And so that's how we do. So it's free for people who co-build with us, and then it's paying for the rest of the world. And so why so far it works good. We went to 140 people in less than 3 years. So we are in hyper-scaling mode. And so what we understood is industrial manufacturing organization, they have an issue, which is that they cannot pay coders and manage coders like tech companies do. They don't have the culture, they don't have the time, they don't have the processes, and it's very hard for them to retain those. And at the other end of the spectrum, the tech people, they do not know zero about manufacturing. And so they can only imagine what would be needed, but they don't have access to that market because there is that cost of entering the subject. Mm-hmm. And so I have a stat for you. Operations in manufacturing, in the grand scheme of things, it's 25% of the world GDP. It's 0.7% of all startups.
Wow, 0.7% of all startups.
for 20%, for 25% of the world GDP.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, there's obviously something that doesn't work. And so that's what we do. We put like those very tech people, tech organization that tech know-how of building product at scale, and we take the pain points of manufacturing companies and we create companies out of that. That's what we do.
That's a very interesting value proposition, very interesting stat as well. I have a couple follow-up questions that's kind of brought to mind. One is, well, I guess the most immediate. Why do you think that you said 25% of the GDP is made up of manufacturing, and yet 0.7% of all startups, that's a tiny number, focus on that space? Why do you think that is?
I think there are quite a lot of reasons, and I think also it's changing rapidly. First, manufacturing has a bad image. Like when you tell your kids, you tell them, you better be good at school, otherwise you end up working at the factory. That's things that are being said right now. So when you have that mental image, you think, okay, I'm not going to work for those people. So that's first. There is another, which is two worlds that really don't mix. Go to San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for 3 years. Go to San Francisco and ask a random tech bro in the streets, tell him, okay, how does a factory work? Like, how does it work? And you'll get answers that are so far out of reality that it will be funny. And so the people who know tech do not know manufacturing, and people who know manufacturing do not know tech. But, and this is where it's interesting, it's changing really rapidly. Time Person of the Year, our dear friend Elon Musk, puts technology as a core asset to building the most tangible physical thing in the whole world, a car. He's now the richest people in the world. And what happened? He created the first factory in California. And now in California, I went to Fremont. In California, you enter a Tesla factory. There are all those big machines, and you have like young people, t-shirts and sneakers, and they are coding with their laptops in front of the machines. This is the future. This is not some greasy, like in the countryside thing going on. That's not where the future is headed. The future is headed towards mixing the tech and physical world in a totally new way of organizing physical production.
Absolutely. No, I love it. I love those. I love that he brought in Elon Musk. Very topical, time of the year, right? Elon Musk. But I agree 100% with you on what the future is. You mentioned specifically going into a Tesla factory, and you've got young people who are engaged in it. And it's coding. It's the nexus between technology, and I think there's a big shift. I think the digital transformation that's happening in manufacturing. I agree with you. I do believe it's rapidly accelerating. I think it was accelerating pre-COVID. I think now, post-COVID or whatever during COVID, it is now exponential. I think it's clearly the way. But it also addresses the big labor challenges. As well, to be able to solve some of that, and you mentioned attracting people to this greasy, this old, this mental image that everybody has. It's a bad brand, a bad rap that it has, and but I think we show a good light. We show what is actually happening. We show true innovation. And there's a reason why people light up and they say, I want to go work for Tesla, like you mentioned. I think that kind of gets me excited a lot.
It does. It's very exciting.
That's awesome. Okay, so another question I want to ask about sort of the value prop. You mentioned that earlier on that you think that the future, the vision that you have is instead of managing, you've got an SAP or you've got one big ERP and it's managing all the processes. That it would be a little bit more micro-focused and saying maybe there's going to be 50 to 100 that'll be, I guess, really instead of generalizing the whole process, it's going to be very specific to a certain process. Or what do you think that those would roll up under a larger ERP? Would they be more, I would say, just independent, or what are your thoughts on that?
If you look at tech cycles in any industry, it's a game of bundling and unbundling. Like there is that joke in San Francisco that there are only two ways of making money in enterprise software, and it's either bundling or debundling. If you look at it from big picture, the bundling phase is ending. Like SAP, the new version, SAP S/4HANA, the perimeter, the functional perimeter is down 30%. So it's 30% less feature than in the previous version. The SAP CEO told his shareholders, the new one, because the old one got fired, the new SAP CEO said, in 10 years, 30% of all my income will come from third-party apps being distributed on top of SAP platform. Mm-hmm. So the best minds and the people who are leading in that area say the same thing. There is a question, which is, will we see a kind of like situation a la Apple, Android, where someone will tax everyone? Yeah. Or will we see a situation a la marketing apps where no one takes a tax? So there is no question about there will be innovation coming from verticalized software, way more easy to install, a lot of value, machine learning, UX, everything. This will happen. Will it happen with an SAP tax or without the SAP tax is the interesting question.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's very interesting as well that you bring up. I don't see how that happens without that, to be honest. Or you look at like Salesforce, for example. I mean, and they're across multiple industries, obviously, but they've got they're growing in the manufacturing space. It's the idea of creating a platform, and then you can plug into Infor doing that right now. And so I do see that happening, but it's to really boil it down, it's creating an app store, right? It's an app store on a platform, and
that's what they are trying to do. And at the same time, there is something called the common data model. The common data model is pushed by SAP, Microsoft, Salesforce, Infor, all the big guys, and it's an open source data model. And if you share the same data model, then you can be interoperable. And so there is no tax and app store. And so the reason why this is being pushed as an open source project is because the late entrants to the party, such as Microsoft or people like that, they say we are going to go the open source route. So there is no single app store done by SAP or anything. But that's very interesting to see.
Yeah, that is super interesting, and I think it's fascinating. I like the idea, the vision that you have going forward, saying that we're going to focus on microprocesses, having the technology, the software to focus on that. One of the things that we're seeing that's very interesting, let's say in the robotics space right now, that is in supply chain and manufacturing, is the whole question of interoperability, where you've got so many different platforms and different use cases with different AMRs or AGVs, but they all, essentially, boiling it down, they all need to talk to each other somehow. And if you have proprietary system on top of proprietary system, it from a scale standpoint, it's very difficult. It's certainly not lean, and it creates challenges there. So, but I think that it does, from an efficiency standpoint, really help to solve some challenges in a much more meaningful way. So it's exciting, I think, to see where technology is going to take the manufacturing space and supply chain, because I think there's a lot of really complex problems that are way above my head, I'll be honest with you. So you go into your thing saying how these are complex processes, and you go to San Francisco and who understands manufacturing and how a plant works? It's like, what, So it's interesting. What would you say right now is the biggest challenge in the industry?
to me, I work closely with car manufacturers. I work closely with other verticals. Every single company is going to become a Tesla, a SpaceX, or some form of it, which is a company that leverage technology as part of their operations and is able to operate at a pace, like at a speed that is 5x the speed that is normal. It started with cars. It is coming with space. It will come in other vertical construction, pharma with the new R&D and blah, blah. Today, all the big CEOs in manufacturing are faced with one question, which is adapt their culture at scale or fail into irrelevance. And the car manufacturers, they took too long to do that. And so you have the Volkswagen CEO who says, we are 5 years behind, and it takes me 10 hours to assemble my cheapest car when it takes 1.5 hours to assemble a Tesla. And so they're all faced with that cultural organizational change. So what I say to them each time is the same. Like, nobody remembers, but 25 years ago, a little known Japanese car company called Toyota came and invented lean manufacturing, and it was radically different from everything everyone was doing at the time. And it took the whole manufacturing industry 10 to 15 years to implement some form of lean, like at world level. So they have deep inside that muscle to change. They just need to grow it back.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, I think it's funny. It's interesting that you bring in lean manufacturing, because one of the questions that I've been posing to some people, and there's different facets of it, right? But relative to, let's look at supply chain, and you look at lean. Have we taken it too far? You know, I mean, certainly we need to look at like the stat that you bring in, you're saying the Tesla in 1.5 hours, 1.5 hours, they can go from fully assembling a car right on the line to 10 hours for others. I think that's what I wrote down here. Obviously, there's some big things that need to happen there. With the Toyota example, I think one of the big areas for that was empowerment, I believe, on the line for people to be able to say, hey, there's a problem, we need to do, versus saying, hey, I'm a cog in a wheel and I'm just gonna, whatever. As I see a problem, there's an issue, quality, whatever, I'm gonna take ownership and we're gonna be able to do that. But it's interesting when we look at production efficiency, I'm curious from a lean standpoint, have we pushed the envelope too far, specifically when you look at the broken supply chain right now that has forced some more, globalization, outsourcing. I'm curious on your thoughts about that. I know we kind of took a left turn here.
Something I am deeply convinced of is that innovation happens by layers, and so it's not this or that; it's this and that. And usually what I tend to see in companies, in industries, is that when they take an organizational innovation layer, if there is not another one to be created on top of that, then you go too far in the first layer and you over-optimize for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And so one thing I say to all the people I work with is, I went to Fremont, to Tesla Fremont. I went to Amazon warehouses that are like top of the pop. I went to the BYD, Build Your Dreams, car maker in China. The big difference between those lighthouse and a regular factory is that they are doing lean and they are doing tech. So they are doing lean at a certain point, which is not to the extremes that we saw, especially in terms of reducing stocks and everything that we see in some companies. So they are applying the first layer of innovation and the next one. Mm-hmm. And so what I see in organization is that organizations create reasons for existing. So you have people, they are in charge of organizing the company. they know lean, they do lean, and they do lean for 30 years if led to themselves. And so you have to take those and say, now you do tech also. And that is a mighty challenge.
That is a big change. That's a big organizational shift. And that's not an easy change.
No, that's not.
And this has been a just fascinating conversation. I know we could literally go on for hours because I probably have about 20 more questions I'd love to ask you, but I don't have the time, unfortunately. So, but for those who would like to learn more about you, they can check you guys out. Then go to oss.ventures. Is that correct?
Yep, excellent.
But yeah, this is, like I said, this has been fantastic. I have a bunch of notes here you can see here that I wrote. It's a fascinating conversation right now. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, and that wraps up today's Industrial Sage Executive Series interview. This is with CEO Renaud Devier, who is the CEO of OSS Ventures. If you'd like to learn more about them, it looks like they have some fascinating technology, and I really love Renaud's vision of the future. And there's so many great insights that I pulled away from here. One in particular, talking about how 25% of all GDP is in the manufacturing space, yet from an innovation standpoint, from tech startups, that it's 0.7%. I think that was fascinating. And a lot of other things as well, just in terms of their vision on how they want to break down the processes and looking at maybe ERP isn't this big global behemoth that's managing all the processes, but it's some more specialization. And so I'm kind of boiling that down. So anyways, as you can tell, I really enjoyed this episode and really enjoyed talking with Renaud. So check them out. Listen, if you're not subscribed onto the Industrial Sage email list, you need to go to industrialsage.com, get on there, because you're missing out great insights like this. We're talking with leaders like Renaud and others about innovation and change that's happening in the manufacturing space. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching or listening if you're listening to the podcast. I'll be back next week with another episode on Industrial Sage.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Get notified every time there's a new episode by signing up for our email newsletters. You can also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review so more industrial professionals can find us. Want us to tell your story? Go to industrialsage.com. This week's episode was produced by Rika Wiersma, filmed and edited by Optimum Productions, and our executive producer is Danny Gonzalez. Thank you for watching Industrial Sage.